on the whole ethics front, it seems like there's great tools to do employee surveys, to figure out really what's going on underneath the surface.
Yep.
But too many companies don't even want to know.
Right.
They don't employ these rather simplistic, not very expensive tools.
Keep the lie alive is maybe what some companies should put on their value statement. They want to keep the lie alive. They don't want to know. And it really makes it hard for whistleblowers. And we've had some other whistleblowers on the podcast, and we've had some chats with those folks. And many of them have said, I didn't know what I was getting into, but if I had the opportunity to do it again, I probably would still do the same thing. How do you feel about that decision that you made?
Well, it's very ironic that Enron's core values were respect, integrity, communication, and excellence. And on that communication value, the little notepads and desk toys that we would have was a Martin Luther King Jr. quote that our lives begin to end the day we remain silent about things that really matter.
Wow. And
so unpacking that quote, what do you mean your lives begin to end? And what he really means is, your soul is eroding.
Yeah, right.
Your ability to think highly of yourself, and what you stand for and what your purpose is, sort of erodes. And I've seen that with some of my Enron colleagues. The ones that, were not the ones, some of the ones that mentally are healthier are the ones that pled guilty and went to prison for a couple of years because they've kind of come to terms with their role in Enron's fraud. But the ones that weren't indicted kind of fought it. They're now coming out on the excuse that the government was abusive or, made a mountain out of a molehill. They're having to rationalize how they weren't involved in something bad. And that rationalization, I think, erodes your soul, causes stress and everything else. I think it's more, for me, I would do things a little more differently, but I think when an ethical challenge lands on your lap, you can't compare your life to what it was before the ethical challenge. It will never be that way again. A challenge is landed on your lap, and it's best to be fearless, to address it, to speak up and try to get it corrected, because that's the path where you're going to be most proud of yourself versus trying to cover up or ignore it.
Wow. I really love the way that you talk about that, Sherron, because, I think a lot of times when people talk about this or when people consider it, the distinction is, well, what is it going to cost me if I speak up? And how does that compare to what my life is going to be if I don't? And it's thought of like, well, hey, I had to deal with all of this, people slinging mud at me, and I was, kind of blackballed from the industry or whatever it is. Look at the cost of speaking up. But I love that you've highlighted the cost of not saying something is that erosion of your soul, that it's that rationalization that you bring up means that you have to carry around all this dissonance all the time of, you know what? I'm a good person. You know what? I do the right thing. It just wasn't that clear this time, and you always have to do those mental gymnastics, and you have to carry that around all the time. So I love that you drew that distinction of the cost that you bear for not speaking up, because I think a lot of times people focus on, well, look at all the stuff you have to deal with if you lose your job, and people are accusing you of this or stuff like that. But that cost on that other side is big, and I love the way you speak about it.
And that cost of rationalization, to your point, it like takes soul energy to keep that flywheel of rationalization going. And at some point, you're just a liar because you're just lying to yourself.
Yeah, no matter what you say to yourself.
Right.
And there's two examples of that within Enron because Cliff Baxter did not like what was happening. He was the head of mergers and acquisitions at Enron. He resigned in May of 2001 because he complained about Enron doing business with the CFO's investment partnership. It got nowhere. He resigned. He's the one that killed himself. And his suicide note said, well, there was once great pride, now there is none. But he was actually one of the good guys. But did he beat himself up because he didn't go to the press or didn't go to the SEC?
Interesting.
After he left the company. But in his defense, in 2001, there really weren't good mechanisms for that. In terms of the SEC didn't have their office of the whistleblower and things like that.
Which is mind-boggling in and of itself.